Do you love freedom? Do you love being clean? Then you'll love Hero Soap Company, made in the USA. Chemical and fragrance free. A portion of each purchase donated to veteran and first responder charities. Initial subscription purchase is matched bar for bar and sent overseas to deploy troops. Let freedom clean. Hero Soap Company.
Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight, my guest is Dr. Michael Salla. Before I bring him on, I have just a couple of quick announcements. First, right now through the weekend, when you order 3 bars of soap from Hero Soap Company, you get the third one free with a Freedom Bundle for you or a friend. Just click the link in the description to take advantage of that sweet deal. Also, if you would like to help the show to donate, we would really appreciate it. It would really help us so much. All the links are in the description for that. Our social media site is back up. And if you sign up for a premium membership, you can check out all our exclusive content, which is there right now. Again, we will be relaunching our premium video site very soon. It'll be easier to access with even more amazing content. Just visit forbiddenknowledge.news or click the link in the description to sign up there. And finally, tomorrow, all day, the 29th, join tonight's guest, Dr. Michael Salla, Laura Eisenhower, and John DeSouza for an all-day online conference, Exopolitics and 2021 Predictions. They're going to be presenting critical information for these strange days. You do not want to miss that. Tonight, I want to welcome Dr. Michael Salla. He is an internationally recognized scholar in international politics, conflict resolution, and U.S. foreign policy. He has held academic appointments in the School of International Service and the Center for Global Peace, American University, the Department of Political Science, Australian National University, and the Elliott School of International Affairs. He has a PhD in government from the University of Queensland, Australia. During his academic career, he was the author, editor of 4 books focusing on international politics. He has conducted research and fieldwork into ethnic conflicts involving East Timor, Kosovo, Macedonia, and Sri Lanka. He is more popularly known as a pioneer in the development of exopolitics, the study of the main actors, institutions, and political processes associated with extraterrestrial life. He is the author of several books, and his Secret Space Program series comprised 4 books that investigated whistleblower and insider testimonies on multiple classified space programs. All 4 have become #1 Amazon bestsellers. Dr. Salla, welcome. How are you doing tonight?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. I've been looking forward to tonight. We're, of course, going to get into exopolitics and how it relates to our current global crisis. I'd also like to talk a little bit about the Secret Space Program, get your insights into that, and a little history of ET-human relations. But this is your first time on. I'd like to know what got you started in ufology, Secret Space Program, and ultimately exopolitics.
Well, it actually really began when I started doing my PhD research back in 1989. I was always interested in international conflict. That was my specialty. So I was very interested in what is it that drives international conflict. And the more I studied that, the more interested I became on the stories of these puppeteers or these secret controllers pulling the strings of international conflict, because at the end of my career, academic career, I'd reached the conclusion that I was like the fireman running around furiously trying to put out fires, when what I should have really been doing was going out there trying to catch the arsonist. And so that's really what happened to me. I changed from being a kind of fireman into being an investigator, into this secret cabal, this government, these puppeteers pulling the strings, manipulating global actors at all levels of government. And so that's when I became very interested in the whole exopolitics literature, beginning in 2001, when I first came across Dr. Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project press conference. And I realized that this actually would explain a lot of the missing pieces in what it is that drives international conflict. And the more I studied that, the more I was able to put the pieces all together. So it's really been a long kind of 30-year journey into understanding international conflict and arriving at this position now where it's all about unmasking the puppeteers that manipulate major global institutions, political, economic, religious and cultural institutions.
Now, I can imagine that the universities you were associated with weren't too supportive of your new research choice. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I was basically forced out. I mean, that's what happened. In 2001, when I first began to be interested in this exopolitics, UFO phenomenon, my university colleagues and my superior were not supportive at all. And they made it very clear that if I continued this research and if I made the university in any way look bad in terms of what they considered to be bad, then I would be forced out. And that's exactly what happened in 2004. The Washington Post ran a feature story on my research. And normally to have the Washington Post run a feature story on your research would be like a great accomplishment in academia. But for me, it was the exact opposite. I was warned. The Washington Post interviewed my university superiors, and I was told that, well, if the Post came out with this story, then that would be pretty much it. And that's what happened. The Post did come out with the story. Just a few weeks later, I was told that my position was being summarily terminated. I would not be renewed at all at the end of the academic year, and so that was it.
Wow. Now, for those that aren't familiar with the term, could you just explain what exopolitics is?
Simply, it's looking at politics from outside of the conventional political spectrum in terms of looking at it in terms of space. So, you know, we have terms like exobiology, or we have exoplanetology, which is all about looking at, you know, an outside biology, an extraterrestrial biology, or an outside our solar system planets, you know, exoplanetology. And so exopolitics was pretty much the same, going outside of the conventional political spectrum, which is kind of like regional politics, comparative politics, global politics, and going beyond that into exopolitics, looking at what is it that's happening outside of our Earth, our planet, and even into the other solar systems and so forth. So that's where exopolitics comes in.
Now, when it comes to, let's say, the United States involvement with UFOs and possible black projects, secret space program, do you think that it all kind of started around the World War II era with Project Paperclip, or do you think there was involvement before?
Definitely began during the Second World War. The Allied powers learned about Nazi Germany having achieved remarkable success in building flying saucer technologies. And that's irrefutable. I mean, there's no doubt that Germany was working on flying saucer prototypes, a number of different flying saucer prototypes. There's a lot of literature that even you have FBI sources, CIA sources, and incredible engineers and scientists after the Second World War confirming that the Germans were working on flying saucer prototypes. The big debate is whether or not Germany achieved any kind of like significant breakthroughs in this in these reverse engineering programs, and were able to take some of those technologies out of Europe before the end of the Second World War into places like South America and Antarctica to continue their programs. A lot of people say, no, they just failed. It was like just a few prototypes that they developed in Europe, and these failed for various reasons. Whereas others say, no, they succeeded. And the most successful prototypes they took with them out of Europe. So anyway, what happened was that during the Second World War, the Allied powers, especially the US Army and the US Navy, learned that the Germans had achieved remarkable success. So they sent teams into Germany at the end of the Second World War to find out what the Germans had achieved success in. And so those teams were called, the US Army, its team was called the Operation Lusty. And so Operation Lusty went in after the Second World War, came to an end, and they had teams of scientists and army specialists retrieving all of the advanced technologies that the Germans were working on when it came to aerospace vehicles. And the Navy did the same thing. They had their own program. And so both the Army and the Navy had separate programs to identify and retrieve any advanced flying saucer technologies, as well as other jet propulsion and rocket propelled technologies that the Germans had developed, and bring it all back into the United States. And that's when the flying saucer program really began in the United States.
Now, according to accounts from some researchers over the years, that the German secret societies actually channeled this information about originally to get this information about how to reverse engineer craft. Is that something you'd agree with?
Yeah, at the very beginning, it was a civilian program led by German secret societies, and they had mystics like Maria Orsich and others associated with the Thule Society and the Vril Society. Those were the two German secret societies that were involved in this, and they were channeling. They were using psychic sources of information, and they achieved remarkable success. So much so that by 1933, when Hitler came to power, he understood that the German secret societies had been so successful in establishing these kinds of esoteric sources of information, and even developing a prototype flying saucer, using these psychic sources of information, that that Nazi Germany appropriated that and put it all under the control of the Nazi SS, and Heinrich Himmler then began to control these programs. But in Nazi Germany, there were always two programs. One was controlled by the Nazi SS, which was trying to weaponize this esoteric flying saucer research technology for the coming war effort, and another program which was much more a kind of esoteric German nationalist program, trying to establish clear lines of communication with this Aryan super race that was located in the Aldebaran star system and in the inner Earth regions of the planet.
So I think it's pretty safe to say, after World War II, after Project Paperclip, NASA, the CIA, various branches of the government, we're pretty much saturated with Nazis, and they are the ones that essentially run our country now. Is that something you'd agree with?
Definitely. There was Operation Paperclip, and of course, everyone knows that there were at least 1,500 German scientists brought in to help the US rocket industry to take off. But what was really happening was that these Operation Paperclip scientists were a bridge to this breakaway German society in Antarctica and to this Fourth Reich that had been established in Latin America using all of this Nazi gold that had been funneled out of Europe before the end of the war, so that the Germans had set up a Fourth Reich, that had economic clout through a transnational grouping of corporations that were linked to German multinational groups, as well as this breakaway group in Antarctica. So they had achieved a remarkable success with that. And so they were able to use that base to infiltrate the US military industrial complex. So by the 1950s, they had become so successful that they began to take over a lot of top aerospace companies. And this is documented. I mean, there are many, many stories of how German scientists came in under Operation Paperclip and were given senior positions in aerospace companies, in US national laboratories, in NASA, with kind of minimal security vetting at all, whereas American scientists had all of these really stringent security tests imposed on them. And the reason was that the Germans were given leadership positions. And this is a fact. If you look at the Marshall Space Flight Center that was set up for the NASA Apollo program, that was run by a German, Werner von Braun, and his and other Germans that had worked with him in the V2 rocket program in Nazi Germany. And also the Kennedy Space Center was run by another German, Dr. Kurt de Boos, who was also another former Nazi. So when you look at this, it's very clear that the Apollo program was being run by Germans, and the real goal was, and I described this in my book, the US Air Force Secret Space Program. The real goal of Apollo was not to get Americans to the moon, which it did. The real program was to get Germans to Mars and Alpha Centauri, and that's the real story of the Apollo program. It funneled billions of dollars to South America and Antarctica with resources and manpower so that the Germans could build a colony on Mars, which could then be used for deep space operations and establishing colonies elsewhere outside of our solar system.
Now, I want to get to that soon, but first I want to talk about Antarctica since you mentioned it. Do you think that Antarctica used to be in our ancient past the home of advanced civilizations, possibly, that there may have been extraterrestrial involvement that started in Antarctica? It used to be tropical or subtropical. What are your thoughts about that?
Yes, I think Antarctica, we know that it was at one point in its history free of ice. There's a really good book by a couple, Rand Flem Ath and his wife Rose. They wrote a book called Antarctica. So they called it Atlantis Under the Ice, and that book really describes how Antarctica during earlier pole shifts was ice free, and that during successive pole shifts, and they map out the relative position of Antarctica around 90,000 BC, around 50,000 BC, and around 11,700 BC, based on historical records that show that Antarctica for those periods was largely free of ice, especially the kind of the Palmer Peninsula of Antarctica was ice-free throughout that entire history. And that matches with Plato's description of Atlantis, and that around 9,600 BC was when you had this catastrophic set of disasters that led to the flooding of Antarctica. And that matches with what we know of the end of the last ice age, the so-called end of the Younger Dryas period, when there was a rapid change in the Earth's temperatures, and where there was a warming in places like Greenland. And that's because there was a pole shift. And so Antarctica moved into its present location just directly over the South Pole, whereas Greenland moved from the northern Arctic region into a kind of slightly more temperate region where there was a substantial increase in temperature. And so that was the end of the Younger Dryas period. And Plato described it perfectly as a great flood, submerging the island continent of Atlantis. So yeah, there's records showing that Atlantis was ice-free, and so that means now submerged under the ice are the remnants of this flash-frozen civilization that was buried under all of the ice sheets after a very rapid pole shift.
Now, I know there's speculation that there may be massive ships under the ice, artifacts, like you were talking about, remnants of an advanced civilization. Do you think there is still active activity going on with possible remnants of this civilization still going on today?
Yes, definitely. What we need to keep in mind is that this is not an isolated situation where there are multiple sources talking about around 11,600 BC or 11,600 years ago that there was this catastrophic set of disasters. These occur on a periodic cycle, and what happens is that you have advanced civilizations that at the end of an era recognize that something major is about to happen, and because they've achieved a certain level of technological sophistication, which typically is restricted to the elites of that society, they're able to escape the cataclysms, and they go either underground or they go off planet. And so what we have, and this is not just Atlantis and Greece, we're talking about China, India, South America, many stories of prior civilizations going underground to escape these cataclysmic events, and elites taking with them advanced technologies. So this has happened again and again, and I think what we have in places like Antarctica are the remnants of these ancient civilizations who thrive in these deep underground caverns, some of which are massive. I mean, the descriptions of some of these caverns are that they are like as big as the state of Texas. They are just massive caverns. And so you can locate an entire civilization down there, because we've got to remember that the Earth's crust is over 100 miles thick. And so anywhere in that 100 miles of thickness, you could have vast pockets, so that the Earth's crust is like a honeycomb. And so you could have in that honeycomb Earth model, you can have vast cavern systems kind of like existing underneath one another. And this is where we can have like historically many different civilizations existing under the Earth, and that's what I think is happening under the ice sheets of Antarctica.
Now, earlier when you were mentioning our secret space program and some of the operations we have, you talked about that we have operations currently on Mars and the Moon. How far do you think the secret space program goes? Are we reaching outside our solar system and beyond? Have we gotten that far?
Well, yes. I think when we're talking about secret space programs, we need to keep in mind that there are multiple secret space programs here. The German breakaway program that was established in Antarctica, that was able to establish colonies on Mars and establish a presence outside of our solar system. Later on, the US Navy was able to begin to replicate that, and by the late 1970s, early 1980s, the Navy was able to build deep space battle fleets. And according to several sources that I've worked with, probably the most well-known is William Tompkins, who has talked about his experiences in helping set up a Navy secret space program. He talked about 8 space battle groups that the Navy established in the late 70s and early 80s. And this has been corroborated by other insiders. And these battle groups operate in deep space and outside of our solar system. And so those are the two that I know of that are most active outside of our solar system: the German Dark Fleet and also the Navy's Solar Warden program. You know, there are other space programs that have been established, but I don't think any of those are as well established or as technologically sophisticated as the German and the Navy's program.
Now, I've interviewed quite a few people about the secret space program, including whistleblowers that claim to have been super soldiers in the program. Now, according to their testimony, one of the ways to get to these destinations like the moon or Mars would be a consciousness transfer, and then there's also this jump room. Are you familiar with this, and could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. Exactly how it is that this 20 back reverse aging process works, and how these insiders can do these multiple terms of 20 years and then come back. One idea is that they kind of like physically go out there, they do their term of service, and then they're physically age regressed and then put back in time to when they first set off, and they kind of like relive that 20 years again. Another model is that their consciousness is taken out of their body and it's kind of like borrowed, where for 20 years they're put into some cloned version, and then they go out there and they do their 20 and backs, multiple 20 and backs even. And then at the end of that, they're put back in their body. Their consciousness is put back into their body. So when they wake up, they have their original body, at 16, 17 years of age, that hasn't changed, that hasn't been used for anything, just that their consciousness has gone out and done this. So, those are the two models, and both of them work. For some people, one makes more sense than the other. And certainly we need to have an open mind as to whether either of these is more valid than the other, or whether both could be working at the same time. But certainly the idea of being able to take our consciousness, our soul matrix, out of this physical body and put it into another body for an extended period of time while the original body is kept in some kind of stasis is something is very, very possible. And I've come across a few people that verify this has been going on for a long time.
What races or what kinds of extraterrestrials do you think that we're directly involved with the secret space program, or have been in contact with us in modern history?
Well, the ones that we know the most about, based on different insiders and witnesses, contactees, experiences, and so forth, are typically the gray extraterrestrials, the human-looking extraterrestrials, the reptilian extraterrestrials, and then you have the insectoid or the praying mantis-looking extraterrestrials. And they appear to have different agendas. They often operate in opposition to one another. Now, and that means that they have different agendas. We do know that the grey and the reptilian extraterrestrials in particular have been helping the US Air Force's secret space program, and were helping the German secret space program. And then you have the human-looking extraterrestrials having helped the Navy's secret space program, as well as having helped the original German esoteric nationalist space program as it was set up. And that never really stopped operating. So, what you essentially have is almost like a proxy war happening between these different groups of extraterrestrials that help try and pull a society in their own preferred direction. So you had this happening in Nazi Germany and the Weimar Republic during the 1920s and early 30s, and then you had the same thing happening in the United States after the Second World War.
Now, when I look at different accounts of abductions, people talking about hybrid programs that they've been taking on ships, and they've met hybrid children of theirs, all these different experiments I hear about. And then we look at different contact accounts throughout history. It seems like these extraterrestrials, if that's what they are, interdimensional, whatever they are, that they... From my view, that we're some sort of experiment, and we always have been, and they have their ways of steering society, steering the world in a certain direction. Do you see it that way as well?
Yeah, I do actually. This is something that it's taken me a long time to kind of work that out, and there are multiple sources that paint this picture. I was first told about this from a contactee by the name of Alex Collier, who talked about 22 different genetic long-term experiments. You had people like Zechariah Sitchin. There's another scholar by the name of Arthur Horn, who wrote a book called Humanity's Extraterrestrial Origins. Actually, that is something along those lines. But essentially saying that if you go back far enough in history, and it seems that 500,000 years is the starting point, that there were a series of extraterrestrial interventions where as many as 22 different extraterrestrial long-term genetic experiments were put in place. And so you've had like between 40 to 60 different extraterrestrial civilizations coming in and collaborating with one another in putting together these, what today exists as 22 long-term genetic experiments, where all of the different major racial groups on the planet are a result of these different genetic experiments. And to me, that makes a lot of sense. It kind of like explains the great variation in human abilities and diversity, and of course the very different kind of like ethnic physiologies that we witness, but yet, you know, we are all like one human genotype when you kind of look at the basic physiology of us.
Yeah, and when you look at the people in power that have always been in power on our planet, these elite people, that have always had this divine right to rule, do you think that they have a bloodline that is possibly off planet, or some kind of extraterrestrial bloodline that they want to keep in power?
Definitely, I think that's what's going on. When we look at ancient books like, or texts like the Sumerian Kings List, or we look at Manetho's History of Ancient Egypt, we see they describe eras where first there was direct rule by the gods, which today we would regard as extraterrestrials. Then there was the rule by the demigods, which were the hybrids, offspring of these extraterrestrials and human females. And then you had the rule by humans who justified their rule on the divine right of kings, that they were directly connected to the gods. And so I think that's when you actually had the ruling bloodline families taking off, that these are groups of elites that trace their ancestry to these hybrid offshoots of these ancient god extraterrestrial rulers that at one point far enough in our history ruled all over all humanity. And so this is why I think these ruling bloodline families believe that they are entitled to secretly manipulate and control humanity, because they say that, you know, when you look at the way human affairs are run today, it's total chaos, that things were much better when you actually had direct rule by the gods. And so we want to restore that. And so that's how they justify what they're doing, to try and bring about, to restore this ancient rule by extraterrestrials. And I think this is something we are in the midst of witnessing, with the possibility of another pole shift and Antarctica becoming again ice-free, and a lot of the buried artifacts there are re-emerging, and these alleged stasis chambers becoming going online again, where the beings, or the gods as they were known, become free. And we're talking about giants, we're talking about Nephilim, we're talking about beings that look human but can be like anywhere from 12 to 20 feet high, and they believe themselves to be the divine rulers of humanity. And you have these ruling bloodline families that want to basically hand over political power to these ancient gods or offsprings of the gods.
When you look at the elite power structure, the Vatican and the royal family is always usually first looked at to be at the top of the pyramid, or towards the top. Would you agree with that? And do you think that the Vatican actually has possible extraterrestrials that they keep there? Because I've heard, some researchers talk about that, and there's speculation that they're actually housing these ancient extraterrestrials. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the thing about the Vatican is that it is a religious institution, but it also has an Academy of Sciences, and the Vatican has always pursued this dual process of trying to practice their religious faith along with scientific exploration and combine the two in their elite institutions. So if you look at their leading organizations like the Jesuits and other orders like the Benedictine monks, Dominicans, and so forth, secretly these groups always combined the esoteric with the latest scientific advances. And so that's why they were able to continue to do breakthrough scientific research in their secret Vatican facilities, the laboratories, and so forth, whereas mainstream scientific institutions practice this separation of church and state. And that was a great mistake. While on the one hand, it was understandable, there was this kind of like unnecessary bifurcation of science and religion. And this was something that the German esoteric societies understood after the First World War, that in order to make great breakthroughs in understanding ancient technologies and being able to develop these advanced technologies to take us into the stars, you needed to combine science and religion, or science and spirituality is probably a better combination. And so the Germans were able to do that, whereas Western scientific institutions, even to this day, continue this separation. But the Vatican never did. The Vatican has always continued to do this separation. And so when you look at time travel technologies, Vatican scientists are at the forefront of that. And there's research showing this. Father Pellegrini Ernetti is one of the Vatican scientists who in the 1950s and 1960s developed Project Looking Glass technology, which was basically looking at time travel, being able to utilize time travel principles through resonant frequencies, Benedictine chanting, and so forth. So the Vatican understands that there is a very close relationship between harmonic resonance, spirituality, faith, and science. And so the Vatican really is at the leading edge. And so this is why when you look at the black programs that combine scientific research with trying to reverse engineer extraterrestrial technologies, you see Vatican scientists involved because they bring in a very different mindset, and they have continued to work very closely with extraterrestrials themselves.
Now, if we look at our planet as if it were an experiment and we are being steered by off-planet controllers, what do you think is the agenda or multiple agendas happening right now? It seems as soon as 2020 hit, that all of a sudden, our world changed. We have all these agendas at play because of supposedly a virus, but now when you go outside, the world's a completely different place. Everyone's wearing masks. The economy's falling apart globally. We're seeing all these changes. We're seeing all this integration with technology. This new technology's coming out. We're going to see the Internet of Things, humans being integrated with technology. And it all seems to be being steered in this direction that researchers like myself have been looking at for years and saying, wow, it's actually happening now. So what are your thoughts on how this all connects on what's happening right now?
Well, we are really at this kind of like critical juncture in our history as a species. I mean, I really think that this coming election 2020 is really going to determine not only the future of the United States as a republic, as a sovereign entity in global affairs, but also the future of the planet. I believe that depending on who wins or the outcome of the election, and there really are multiple scenarios emerging here with the election, probably the optimal scenario is that you actually have the white hats ensuring that there's a clean and fair election, and that the technology will be revealed, the advanced aerospace technologies will be revealed in a second Trump administration through Space Force, because I think Space Force is a disclosure initiative. It was set up to make it possible for the release of these advanced aerospace technologies that were secretly developed and deployed going all the way back to the 60s and the 70s. So they want to release these, and the way to do it is to do it through Space Force, which is a new military service, and Space Force can simply say, these are our newly acquired acquisitions, these are incredibly new, powerful technologies, and we want to share these with the planet and help American industry start to kind of reverse engineer these for the general public. And Space Force can unveil these technologies without any questions being asked in terms of, well, you know, this technology is very old, because Space Force leaders can say, well, you know, we're a new service, these are new technologies. But on the other hand, you have the deep state, which has a completely different agenda. And I think what they want to do is come up with some major false flag event, a really major one. And I think that the one that probably is most likely is a false flag asteroid impact. Many people probably aren't aware that back in November of 2016, FEMA, NASA, the US Air Force, the California State Emergency Services came together to put together a simulated asteroid impact that would take place on September 20, 2020. So we're talking about something that's going to take place in just over 3 weeks from now. That was the hypothetical exercise. And to me, this makes perfect sense, that if you wanted to prevent a second Trump administration, what you want to do is have the presidential elections cancelled because of some catastrophic event. And a false flag asteroid event would be the way to do it. And I think this is, all the pieces are in play. Now, whether or not that happens, I don't know. I think when you look at all the pieces, this all lines up very well. I'm actually working on an article on this that I'm going to release in the by Saturday, August 29, and also discuss at the Exopolitics in 2021 predictions webinar, where I'll go into more detail into this. But I think this is the false flag event, and this would set in place a series of constitutional events that would lead to President Trump being removed from office through by applying the Constitution on January 20, because his term of office ends on January 20, 2021, unless there's a new election. And so without a new election, Trump's term of office would end, and then the power would devolve back to the US Congress to select the next president. And so this is one way I think that the deep state wants to remove Trump from power. So I'll be discussing this at length in my article that comes out on my exopolitics.org website and on this at this upcoming webinar.
Now, as far as myself, I have never followed politics. I've never trusted any president. I'm of the personal belief that they're all under control. Trump has done some things that have made me, raise my eyebrow a little bit and think of him a little differently, but I'm still very agnostic towards politics, and I'm really not looking towards anyone to save us, because I personally am of the belief that it's up to us to stand up, to have an uprising, to kind of take everything back, because I just don't trust them. I don't trust politicians. But like I said, Trump has done some interesting things, I'll say, and there are I would say more positive things coming out of that side than the left. So I definitely like to hear what makes you think, what makes you trust Trump and think that he is the answer to kind of change this.
Well, I think probably for me, the most compelling reason for why I believe Donald Trump is the best person for the job is his support for the creation of Space Force. I mean, he has been a big proponent of the development of Space Force from very early on. And Space Force is tremendously important because what it's trying to do is to bring under the control of one US military service all of the different space assets that have been deployed, not only by the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, Marines, but also corporations, and bring all that under the control of one unified military service that maintains accountability, transparency, a clear chain of command. And that is very important, because the thing is, one of the things you learn in doing this research is that the way the deep state operates is through false flag operations, where they can basically deceive the public and deceive regular government and military personnel that someone from another group has pulled off a major attack on your country or on your institutions. But with the creation of Space Force, it makes it more and more difficult for these kinds of false flag events to take place. And what's very, very interesting is that while Trump has been a very big supporter of Space Force, there are many people from the political left that are calling for the abolishment of Space Force. And you also have that series on Netflix that is trying to ridicule Space Force. And so you have to kind of like look at, well, why did Netflix come out with this series where Steve Carell stars and it makes fun of this new military service? Why is that? I'll tell you why. The deep state doesn't want Space Force. The deep state is terrified by Space Force, and the reason is very simple, because Space Force will put an end to the false flag operations that the deep state has been pulling off using its space operations or space assets since 9/11. 9/11 was a false flag event orchestrated from space using the deep state's assets to pull that off.
Now, over the past few years, we've been seeing a lot more talk about UFOs in the mainstream media. We have the To the Stars Academy. Supposedly, they're going to be talking about possible off-planet materials that they found. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think that they're preparing us for something, that there may be some sort of disclosure in the near future, or is it something maybe more malevolent that they're going to do a fake invasion? What are your thoughts on that?
You know, when we look at everything that's emerged over the last few months, I think there are multiple agendas here at play. In terms of like doing some kind of official disclosure. I think one narrative, and we see that with the whole kind of like ATIP program, the To the Stars program, where you have all of these disclosures pointing to these UFOs being a threat, being a national security threat. And I think that all feeds into this idea of a possible alien threat, or some kind of threat posed by other major nations. But I think the whole threat scenario is being pushed for a particular UFO narrative to make people scared, so that way they kind of like surrender authority. And at this point in our history, even though I would love for extraterrestrial disclosure to happen, I don't think the mass majority of people are ready for it yet. They need to be prepared. So if you were to just unveil extraterrestrials are here, I think there'd be chaos. Whereas the other narrative or the other initiative, I think, which is being pushed by white hats, is to first release advanced technologies, is to first set up something like Space Force, which will be the vehicle for releasing new energy technologies, for having American industries basically build these advanced aerospace technologies, new energy systems, alternative healing modalities, build all of these and kind of like massively reindustrialize America with all of these advanced technologies so that we become something closer to like a Jetsons society with flying cars, kind of like free energy devices in our homes. And then like 5 years, 10 years down the track, they would then reveal to us the existence of extraterrestrial life. So I think there are these multiple agendas at play, and we're seeing it now with what's happening with Congress being briefed about these out of these world technologies that are being studied in corporate facilities, and that this is something that reverse engineering has been attempted on.
Now, do you think if Trump doesn't win, that we are going to be on an even more fast track to just this total dystopia that you can see coming in the future, this total slave control system that they apparently want to enforce on the planet? Do you think that we're on a fast track for that if Trump doesn't win?
Unfortunately, I think if Trump doesn't win, what's going to happen is that China is going to become the dominant power on the planet. And at some point, China will eclipse the US militarily and would be able to basically launch a space Pearl Harbor, take out the US satellite grid, and make the Chinese satellite grid the default grid for the planet. And so we would all then be linked up into the Beidou satellite grid that China is setting up. We would all have this advanced 5G technology, which would bring incredible internet speeds into our phones and into our homes, but it would all be controlled by China. You would have artificial intelligence being increasingly used to monitor us. All of the major internet companies, social media companies like Google, Yahoo, Facebook, Twitter would basically line up very closely behind China, and we would have massive censorship. The alternative news media would be suppressed. The only thing that would come forward would be a kind of China-centric worldview, and anyone that bucks the system, we would be subjected to a social credit system, which would be global. Anything you said and did would impact your social credit score. So we would essentially become a slave society if Trump isn't re-elected. And I think it's as simple as that, unfortunately. I think it's quite clear that the Democratic Party is really controlled by China and the deep state, whereas the Republican Party really is still trying to maintain this kind of sovereign status of the US with the US military firmly behind it.
Right now, our country's so divided that no matter what the turnout, there's going to be some unrest. It's possible we may even see some kind of civil war after this if Trump wins, or, even if he doesn't. It seems like we can't win either way because there will be some sort of consequences or civil unrest to follow. Do you see that happening?
Well, what I see happening is that, the mass media is trying to put out this idea, this narrative that America is deeply divided and that there's fighting between Americans. I have to challenge that. I mean, I think what you have is that on the one hand, you have rural America, which is solidly in favor of law and order, a strong middle class, American sovereignty, American values, a strong military, and that's for both Democrat and Republicans in rural America. When you get into the major cities, what you have is kind of like a lot of the political left who are being instigated to riot and demonstrate. And because of the coronavirus, you have a lot of young people, college-age people, that are just kind of getting out there and demonstrating, because it's basically the only way now you can get out there and be with your buddies and do things together. So I think it's an illusion. This whole idea that America is deeply divided is an illusion that is being promoted by the mainstream media. And it's only in major urban areas that you get this idea of this kind of this kind of social divide. But even if you go into major American cities, I don't think there's really that much support for defunding the police and really having these kind of left-wing mobs being given a free hand. I don't think there's much support for that at all. I mean, you have business leaders in the big cities in Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco. They're totally opposed to giving free rein to these riots and these demonstrators. So this is really a narrative being pushed by the mainstream media, and it's losing support. And right now, the deep state knows this. They understand through internal polling that the Democratic Party is in a free fall. The support for them is in a free fall. That minority voters, people that traditionally voting, traditional independents, are all moving over to the Trump democratic law, to the Trump law and order approach. So this is why the deep state is panicking, and why I think that this idea of a false flag event, a major event that creates a kind of a regional catastrophe in the United States, is seriously being contemplated, and all the signs are there. And the only question to my mind is whether the white hats and the military and the secret space program can prevent that.
Yeah, the media is definitely doing an all-out psychological warfare campaign to, if not divide us, to push this image that we are divided, like you said. There's all kind of, of this media division everywhere you look. You can't watch the news because, first of all, there's no good information that's going to come out of it anyway. And second, it's all negative, trying to push their agendas forward. Now, we have a few minutes left. I'd like to get back to extraterrestrials for the last few minutes that we have. Do you think that there are some that walk among us that we could be next to at any given day and we wouldn't even notice? Do you think that they are walking among us?
Definitely. I think when, looking at the big picture, in terms of extraterrestrials, I think what we need to consider is that the vast majority of extraterrestrials are very positive beings that want to help humanity evolve, and that they have decided that the best way of doing that is not to show up and say, here we are, we're here to help you with advanced tech and we'll help you solve your problems. That approach has been tried before and failed spectacularly. That's what happened in Atlantis, and that failed. So what they're doing now is that they're operating behind the scenes. They are infiltrating human society, putting their people in prominent positions in helping thought leaders, in helping military institutions. I think William Tompkins described it really well in his book, Selected by Extraterrestrials, where he described how these extraterrestrials infiltrated major corporations to help American engineers and scientists solve problems concerning the development of very powerful aerospace vehicles that could operate in deep space. And that, I think, is how the positive extraterrestrials are operating. Now, there are other extraterrestrials. I think there's a smaller number of kind of like more negative extraterrestrials who have been working with the deep state, working with compromised institutions. We're talking about grey extraterrestrials, reptilian extraterrestrials, and that they are overall a minority. But nevertheless, they have had like an outsized influence because they have been working directly with the deep state. And so what we are witnessing now is really are kind of like the end game is whether or not we as a species are going to follow this kind of higher path of technological development with kind of spiritual and ethical evolution, or whether we're going to go down this path of like catastrophe, crisis, and manipulation by the deep state. And I'm very optimistic. I think that we are going to succeed, but still, you know, we have to be very wary of what the deep state can do, because like, you know, like a cornered animal, it is very dangerous when it doesn't have any options left.
Now, just recently, I had my very first contact experience. Now, my whole life, I've always been interested in the ufology and extraterrestrials and the paranormal, but I've never had an experience. I've never even seen a UFO. Well, a few weeks ago, I saw my first UFO. I couldn't prove that it was a UFO, but it was definitely something interesting. And then 2 weeks after that, I had a meditation session, and I truly believe I made contact with another intelligence, and my consciousness was on what I can only describe as a ship, and I met other etheric beings there. Now, this seems to be happening a lot to a lot of people during this time. Like, I've never experienced this, and I've had plenty of people who've described this to me, and I could never wrap my head around it until I experienced it myself. The communication between these beings was completely psychic, and I felt such a great sense of love coming from these beings. These were definitely positive beings trying to get a message to me, and they did. They gave me a lot of information during our contact. Do you think that this is happening worldwide, that a lot more people are being contacted?
Yeah, that's a very common story. I've heard that again and again, that typically that's how it begins. It's like there's a UFO sighting, and then there's that telepathic connection that is established. And after there's a certain level of comfort that is reached, then it progresses into a physical contact. So that's fantastic, what you're experiencing. And you know, I wish you well in that, because it's an incredible journey, and I think this is something that is happening worldwide. Anyone that is receptive, that is open to that, they are going to experience that, because this is our future. We are going to become a galactic society, and this is the way it'll happen. That more and more people will become very comfortable with the idea of open contact with extraterrestrials. And eventually there'll be so many people that are having experiences similar to yours, and they're going to be kind of like wanting the extraterrestrials to show up. And that's when we can make a really spectacular quantum leap forward, because even though I think white hats in government, and I think that a lot of the US military guys, the patriots and the ones that stand by the Constitution, I think that they are at heart really good people. Nevertheless, they are military, and they have that military mindset. So I think you can only get so far with that. I think ultimately it's going to be people like you, like me, who are open and have this kind of direct connection with extraterrestrials. We are going to be the ones that kind of take us further down the path of becoming a galactic civilization. And I think that'll be the process. And I think it's going to happen. But, you know, still, we have to get through some big hurdles at the moment.
It's very interesting, because they told me that I was ready, so that this was the right time for them to become known and interact. So that's very interesting. Now, do you think within our lifetime we could see this worldwide, you know, open communication with these beings?
Yeah, I think so. I think this is what's going to happen. I think the optimal outcome to me is going to be that you're going to have the white hat succeeding, that everything moves forward in terms of Trump and the whole kind of release of Space Force, the release of all of these advanced technologies that'll move forward under Space Force. And as these new technologies come online, people will begin to kind of like open their minds to incredible new possibilities. Space is on the agenda. I mean, you're going to have the Artemis project, where you're going to have Americans landing on the moon again, and then they're going to plan to do the same thing on Mars. So people's attention is going to expand with Space Force, all of these landings. And then it's just going to be an organic process where all of a sudden people's attention goes to space. More people are going to have experiences like yours, making telepathic connection. And then one day the extraterrestrials will suddenly show up. And I think at that point, the white hats will be firmly in control. The white hats will have worked things out with the positive extraterrestrials and say, yeah, okay, it's all right. Now you can show up that, these are the ground rules for you doing that. And they'll work out an agreement and the extraterrestrials will show up. And I think that'll be the optimal outcome. And so I think 5 years to 10 years, we are going to have positive extraterrestrials publicly emerging and openly interacting with everyone on the planet.
Well, that would be absolutely amazing. Dr. Salla, thank you so much for coming on. And everyone, be sure, click the link in the description to get your tickets to tomorrow's conference, Exopolitics and 2021 Predictions, with Dr. Michael Salla, Laura Eisenhower, and John DeSouza. It's an all-day conference. You won't want to miss it. Before you head out, Dr. Salla, if people are interested in finding out more about your work and your books, tell them where they can do so.
Yes, people can just visit my exopolitics.org website, and I regularly publish on there, and I have an email list, so join the email list, and that way you'll be notified whenever there's an update. And in the next day or two, I will be putting out a major new article where I discuss some of the things that we were talking about. So that'll be free, so anyone can just log on or subscribe, and you'll get that article delivered into your mailbox. So thanks for having me on your show, and really enjoyed the interview. Aloha.
Okay, thank you. You have a good night.